John, how much of the life still exists today? Like, are they still acting like active gangsters, mobsters in America?
You know, I'm so far removed. I'm about 26 years removed from that life. I'm only 15 years removed from prison. So you're incorporated when you're in prison, you're on the compound, you're doing time with a lot of fellas from the streets. You have to understand what RICO did to understand where the status of where that lifestyle is today, okay? RICO was a law that was basically constructed sort of in the beginning as a civil law. It was good, and it's Robert Blakey, he's a Notre Dame law professor. He constructed the law to be used civilly at first, and then he slowly evolved it to use it in the criminal aspect. And civilly in 1970, I believe it was first introduced as a law, if my memory serves me right. And then by 1979, I want to say, 1979 into 1980, they made 2 criminal indictments. I believe those were the first 2 criminal indictments. One was against a guy named Frank Thierry, who they accused of being the leader of the West Side, the Genovese family. And again, when I say the names of families, these are names that the government and the media had established. I don't know these names. They know these names. They establish them for the press, and they identify various names. But he was accused of being the shot caller for that group. And then you had a guy named Tony Provenzano, who was the union leader, the Teamsters union leader, that was always adverse and at loggerheads with Jimmy Hoffa out of New Jersey. So they were respectively in 79, 80, 2 indictments came about.
Tony Provenzano, yep. And he died while in prison. They both were convicted of RICO. Now, I remember driving in a car with my dad, and my father saying to me, he had said that in 79, he came home in 77. Did the state bid, he came home in 77 August, and we're driving in the car, and he heard it on 1010 Wins News. My father used to always put on 1010 Wins News. That's always was in his car. And if he went to music, it would be Jimmy Roselli or Engelbert Humperdinck. But he had 1010 Wins News on. And when it came over the radio about the first conviction, and again, my memory doesn't serve me correct which one fell first. I want to say Tony Provenzano, that he fell first. Indictments, like I said, were within a year. My father said, that's the beginning of the end. I remember him turning to me and saying, I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't quite, because I'm in military school at the time. I was a bit naive to certain things. But at this point, you already know how Dad makes money.
Well, you know what? You pretty much understand when you come from Howard Beach, and the only way I can really closely make the public understand it, you have to make a correlation. And the correlation would be, you ever seen the movie The Town?
Of course.
Okay, with Ben Affleck?
Great movie.
Great movie.
It's the famous line, right?
Well, I was away with a lot of those guys. A lot of those guys I was in Raybrook with, all good, solid kids, Irish kids. They had lived in that conclave there. You couldn't, there's only one way in, one way out. How they used to pinch those kids when they used to do a score is they block the bridge and get them every time coming back one way or the other.
Wow.
Well, Howard Beach is very similar. There's only 2 ways. One way in, of course, Bay Boulevard, and the back way dumping into Brooklyn. Close-knit, everybody's the same. More than not, people will like my father. I wasn't unique that my father was in prison. My next-door neighbor's father was in prison, or uncle or cousin or somebody else was in prison for similar situations. They were all part of the street element. So really, if you were Italian-American and you lived there, you were more so inclined to know or be a part of that life or have relationships than not. If the answer would be not, then you were the odd duck. You were the exception, I was the rule, okay? You would be the exception and I would be the rule. So if you were that guy that didn't really know any better or didn't have a friend or didn't know somebody that was in the street life, you were the exception. Because the rule was we all knew each other. We were real tight there, and you couldn't come in or out without us knowing about it, and that's basically the way it went down. So at that point, you're growing up, you get an understanding. Your father's a bit different. He used to list on his taxes, he's a professional gambler. I just scratched my head. What exactly is a professional gambler? I'm not quite sure. Yeah. And my mother always was that, solid rah-rah person in his corner. She adored my father, never asked questions, but P.S., she would stand up, she'd go nose to nose with him if she had to. Or if someone, God forbid, would say something negative about my father, she would take you to task. She would tighten your ass up really quick, my mother. So
She didn't ask, we couldn't get those. If I was a kid and I was inquisitive and I would want to ask that question to my mother, she would say, your father provides very well for us. That would be the response. So you'd have to go out into the streets to learn about what's going on, what time it really is.
Did she grow up in the same streets? Like, did they meet?
No. Well, it's a great story. My mother's from Long Island City. My father's a Brooklyn guy, okay? Originally from the Bronx, evolved from the Bronx, but raised in Brownsville, East New York, Brooklyn area, okay? Home of Murder Incorporated. Albert Anastasia was his idol growing up. And they had met one day. My mother was 17 years old, and she was applying for a barmaid job. She was in Brooklyn, hitting the circuit, trying to get a barmaid job, and she was being harassed by a guy who followed her out of one of the interviews. So she looked into a bar, and she seen a group of gentlemen sitting at the end of the bar, opened the door and walked in, and she says, excuse me. She said, do you mind I sit here? This guy's bothering me. Some guy's bothering me. My father's sitting there. He's a 19-year-old young punk, if you want to say it, okay, with a three-quarter leather jacket. He's sitting there, the hair's slicked back. He says, who's bothering you? And she says, well, no, this guy's he's just following me, and I just feel very uncomfortable. He says, sit right over here. The guy opens the bar door and looks in, sees my mother sitting with my father at the bar, and just turns, and my father shoots him a look, and he just runs out. And they began to talk at that point. She was 17, he was 19. They moved in together a short time later, and they were never separated.
Wow.
Prison only separated them. Only prison separated them.
Wow. So when she, like, at what point did she, I mean, even if you know some of these stories, at what point did she know how he provides?
His friends. You go into the Copacabana.
Yeah.
Okay, you go to, and that's where my father would take my mother. As his girlfriend, as his bride, as his wife. Constant companion was Angelo Ruggiero, who was my father's boyhood friend since they were 10 years old. My Aunt Marie, my Uncle Angelo's wife, became very close to my mother. You'd see the characters there. You knew exactly what you were dealing with when you walked into Copacabana. You knew you weren't at the Friars Club.
So she kind of got an idea. She's like,
very intelligent woman, my mother, very perceptive. She understood what time it was.
Now, let me ask you, is the culture of when you get into it, because when my wife and I were getting ready to get married, I told her, I said, listen, I don't know what you're looking for for a husband.
Right.
I'm going to be running, gunning, and this is going to be the life. Are you okay with it?
Yeah.
Did they have that conversation or no? It's just...
Absolutely. In fact, it reminds me of a story years later. My mother would get a little, when things really got complicated, and this is like 1985, things got really complicated. And he became now, my father was a local hero, local celebrity in Howard Beach, Brooklyn, in the boroughs, but nobody knew him. He was a local guy. There was a news story I remember when I was in military school about the Garment Center, and it was the first time I ever seen my father on TV. I had seen him on TV, and that was like 1980, 81 that this flashed on. But now, 85, he was basically pushed onto the world stage. The media made him created this Dapper Don situation, this character they created, and it became very complicated life at that point. Everywhere now we had to be, on our guard, basically. And my mother, at some point, post 85, my father got pinched in 86. He went back in. They remanded his bail. He was indicted on the 80, and he was indicted in March of 85 on a racketeering case, which he was the first to beat any of the RICO cases. And he was remanded. His bail was remanded in 86, April, I believe. Frankie DeChico was killed in a car bomb. And a short time later, they had a hearing, and they decided to take my father off the street in 86. He came home. We beat the case. First one to win the RICOs. Everybody fell. Commission case.
Why is that? Why did he beat him? Is it a lawyer? Is it fear? Is it connection?
Well, the government would want you to believe that my father fixed the case, okay? And they actually, through that Gravano character, they said that they got to a juror. Now, let's be a devil's advocate. Let's say Gravano was correct. Let's say it did happen. Let's say he got to the juror. What about the other 11? They didn't exist? There's 12 juries, last I remember. In a felony federal case in America, I've tried many, there's 12 jurors that decide your fate. So let's pretend that John Gotti did get to that juror. Let's pretend, okay? What about the other 11 jurors that voted not guilty? Okay? They all had their own mindsets. So all 12 across the board voted not guilty, and John was the first one. And you're asking me, why do I believe he won the case? I'm going to tell you why.
Bruce Cutler, at that time, the case started out with Neil Delacroce as the lead defendant, and John Gotti, my father, was accused of being a captain under Neil, and he was the second defendant, and then they had 7 more co-defendants right on down the line, including my Uncle Gene. And the lead attorney was Barry Slotnick on that case. Barry Slotnick represented Neil Delacroce, and Bruce Cutler, who was a disciple, was under Barry Slotnick, took my father as the second seed. Once Neil Delacroce died of cancer, Barry Slotnick thought he was going to take my father as the lead defendant. My father says, no. I came to the dance with Bruce. Bruce is going to stay right here. And that was the creation. And what we got to see, Pat, was an evolution of 2 individuals. I've never seen anything like this. It was magnificent to watch. Okay? Bruce Cutler, here's a guy that his father, Murray, was a NYPD police officer, became an attorney. Bruce Cutler was a prosecutor out of the Brooklyn DA's office, someone that John Gotti would hate. He would hate any prosecutor, and he would hate his father for being a cop. Okay, my father would, on the norm, would say, I wouldn't even talk to you. You're a prosecutor, and your father was a cop, hit the bricks. But that was the lawyer, that was the structure that when Neil got the case, Barry Slotnick came on board, my father was assigned Brucey, but they developed an amazing rapport, and I saw Bruce evolve almost into an alter ego of John Gotti's. And he had the balls to stand up and actually perform, to go against the government, to say exactly what he felt, to take the indictment that was trash, that was so ill-prepared, to throw it into the garbage pan and say this is rancid, and the jurors watched his theatrics. They were won over. They saw how John Gotti composed himself. They saw how he comported himself. And I think a lot of them began to fall slightly in love with him, or, evolved to liking his character and how, the humor. One of the co-defendants was a gentleman named Lenny DiMaria. Very funny, very witty guy. Like, he would say little jokes in between, little quips in between. And I think it was the combination, the chemistry of those individuals that were on trial that won that jury over. The chemistry of those, along with Bruce Cutler and these personality of lawyers, the Santangelo brothers, Richie Raybach, and so on, the personality of those attorneys on that case, I believe that's what won the day.
You're going to think I'm crazy when I tell you this, but the last 13 and a half years, I've been working on my first fiction book to write, ever. Fiction book to write. And while I finished this book, a year ago, I got the strangest phone call about one of the characters in the book where the guy wanted to meet with me, and he read the book. And afterwards, was like, wait a minute, am I the villain in the book? This is a story about a character named Asher, who is half Armenian, half Assyrian, whose father was involved in the Iranian Revolution, linked to Savak, working with the Shah, that they escape, and he gets recruited to a secret society. Well, when you go to the secret society, it's been around for a couple thousand years. They've developed some of the craziest leaders of all time, and they test you. There's unique tests that they have at this society where they test to see your emotional mental toughness. One of the tests that they have is very rigorous. It's purely mental. Of course, there's a physical one, but one is mental and emotional. If you're Armenian, if you're Syrian, if you're Persian, this is a book you're going to be reading and saying, holy moly, this is the kind of stuff you talk about in here? Yes. If you're somebody that's fascinated by history, this is a book for you. Characters. There's a technology that this society, secret society, builds where you go into a vault. I won't spoil it for you. When you go down, they have a technology where you get to sit down and watch and have a 3-4 hour conversation with Tupac. You can set up a debate between Karl Marx and Ayn Rand. Karl Marx is in the book, who wrote Communist Manifesto. Ayn Rand, who wrote Atlas Shrugged, is in the book. Marilyn Monroe explains the concept of seduction and sex in the book. When you read the book, it's about development of the next leaders in the world and how they do it and how they've been doing it for many years. And it's also about how to prevent the end of civilization and how this organization goes about doing it. So, I've never written a parenting book before, but if I ever wrote a parenting book, this is the closest thing to it because it's all mindset, a lot of crazy stories. Again, 13 and a half years. Trust me, I told myself I will not publish this book until I sell my insurance company and I'm fully disconnected from it, where it's no longer my responsibility 100%. When you read this, if you're a creative person, if you like fiction books, if you enjoyed Atlas Shrugged, or if you enjoy Divergent, if you like books like that, I think you're gonna enjoy reading this book. It's the creative side. Business books is very easy. Here's how you do it, here's how this how it works. This is very creative. If you haven't placed your order yet, now you can order it on Simon & Schuster, Amazon. I'm going to put the link up below somewhere here, maybe even in my profile. Go order the book and read it. I've never written a book where I can't wait to read your reviews to see what you think about this book. So I'm going on this wild journey, and we have some plans with this book here. If you support the things that I work on, I would appreciate you going and reading the book, order the book on Amazon, and then post a review. If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.